I mean, it's a great place, and it's just slap bang in the middle of the city, and a place that is a really interesting point of reflection for a lot of people in the neighbourhood. And you've got here, you know, a watercourse that for many years was hidden, went underground, was seen as just an inconvenience to our cities. This is a natural form that is getting in the way of our roads, getting in the way of our buildings, and was hidden away. And then only very recently, for a number of reasons, one of which was recognising actually that we need more and more of these places to give people a space to enjoy nature, but also as a place to manage water. That we see that, you know, with the intensification, we saw a huge amount of flooding, and that streams like Oakley Creek, Te Awa are great for managing that water. And so actually building or rebuilding the creek into a naturalised form rather than a stormwater culvert to manage some of the runoff for a lot of the houses nearby is an amazing kind of restoration, and a really important thing that we need to do more and more of as we grow as a city. And multifunctional as well, which is fantastic. You know, a place where we've seen people walking past and enjoying like the physical space, the mental like recharge away from the city. Yes, managing water, but also doing a whole bunch of other stuff, which is so important as we get more and more people in a city and going, actually, we can't keep spreading and sprawling and growing bigger and out and further away where we're impacting more and more other green space, that we actually need to use our space more with lots of different functions all at the same time.
And we have these huge challenges. Auckland is already 14% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. Our population's 1.7 million now, and heading, we think, to about 2.4 million by about 2030. So how do we build differently and better to make this a far more climate compatible and sustainable city?
I think it's a really good point, and you almost need to, we need to flip that conversation, and we need to go, well actually we do need to think about emissions, and one of the big things about urban emissions is effectively needing to be more compact. So we think about actually Auckland being, you know, a large part of those emissions is related to transport, and hence the earlier point about we can't keep going further and further away from where we need to be because we just add to those transport emissions. So we need to be more compact, we need to be more dense, we need more verticalness in our built form. But the only way that will be successful is if we bring nature into the city. You know, we need to move away from this model where the house and the garden, that your garden was your green space. We need to intensify, we need to go more vertical, we need to put more people into that space, but we need to replicate, you know, that natural interaction by having spaces like this where we have nature in our cities as part of the city that enables that intensification.
So with the transport and housing change around here, so particularly more apartment buildings and the higher density on what was the Unitec campus, these are giving us some signs that we can understand how our urban form's changing.
And I think that, you know, the point there is that it changes, and cities change, they evolve, they have new functions, new purposes, new priorities as well. And so what we've seen in terms of, you know, the space that this was, how it's moved from being one thing and now it's something different, I think we need to remember that as we build our future forms. And actually, you know, this element of climate impacts and climate change and needing to be more flexible. You know, one of the things that we know about this area is because it's got this natural watercourse through it, it is a place where water gathers. So there will be more and more flooding as our climate impacts kind of exacerbate and get stronger. So it's really important to take those cues from nature to go, well, this is going to flood. So actually, why don't we use it as a place where we can manage that stormwater rather than trying to build over the top of it and trying to disrupt those natural flows. I think what's really interesting is, you know, the more and more people you talk about what should the form of a city take, you know, you get a good consensus that actually from a climate and a well-being perspective, like this concept of a 15-minute city where not just where you live, but some of those core services, whether it's childcare or groceries or whatever it looks like, having them close together means that you're tackling that climate impact, you're actually building a stronger neighbourhood. And so there are more and more people who kind of get that conceptually. and the planning regime is starting to move towards that, but it's still, the challenge of legislation and how you get that through, into practice, because, arguably we haven't seen a lot of really good, 15-minute neighborhood type developments. And people are people. They want to see what this looks like. They want to touch it, feel it, before they can really accept that actually these benefits are real. So I think it's good. It's a good starter, but there is still a ways to go, I feel, in terms of actually getting it into practice.
As you look around the country, what are some of your favourite examples, and indeed here in Tāmaki Makaurau, of neighbourhoods that are starting to show us the way?
I think, somewhat biased, but I feel like what happened out in Hobsonville is a really good example of what you can do in a green or more, mostly green, so undeveloped arena. The challenge is how we do that in a more existing developed arena. And we've got some great examples of places with real good bones, really good structure. Places like Onehunga, places like Mount Roskill, where we have an opportunity to really build at a greater scale in fairly close proximity to the city, with hopefully good public transport links as well, that will potentially be those places going forward. But I aside from looking at places like Hobsonville where you've been able to start from scratch, it's really difficult at the moment to see those good examples.
I think we should hop on our bikes and go and have a look at Onehunga, which was our plan anyway. But no, it's a very good example of once a little port town outside Auckland, now very much part of Auckland, and now starting to take on yet another phase in its long life. Well, here we are in Onehunga, and here we have behind us a very good example of a very new style for Auckland. An apartment complex, only 3 stories high, a big central area in the middle of it of green space. And it's a very notable sign of new style.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is that we've got some amazing amenity nearby in close proximity to what is, in Auckland, New Zealand terms, intensive housing, for a reason, because Onehunga has a fantastic, connection into the city, whether it's the train line or buses. You've got schools, a number of primary schools and a high school nearby, and it's really important to make the most of that amenity that we already have as we intensify, as we grow, as we talked about earlier, as we try and fit more and more people into this space.
Also, what's interesting about the area is that this big development goes through from Victoria Street to Spring Street, because on the other side is the Dolphin Community Theatre, which is on Spring Street, which has been there for decades. And I'm sure they'll really appreciate having audience members now, more of them within walking distance, or perhaps even young people wanting to be part of community theatre.
And I think, the point you make there around community, as we intensify, as we get more dense, then that community side, we talked about the natural environment earlier, but the importance of actually how we create community, how we bring people together and link them, is going to be increasingly important. So those kinds of places where people can belong is going to be a really key part of successful urban development. We talk about like transition, transformation, change, both in terms of how we move around, but also in the face of some pretty significant climate risks, and knowing that we're going to need to think about how we come together as a community and how we use those kinds of facilities to actually find connections and find ways of meeting other people and talking with other people and connecting with them. Such an important part of the city that we often forget about. We think about the physical stuff and we forget about the social side.
Now, in terms of how we are actually constructing new homes and buildings these days, are we actually building to a high enough environmental and climate standard yet, or is there still a ways to go on that?
Yeah, we're without a doubt doing a lot better. We're doing much better than we have before. We have better ways of measuring, performance of buildings, and a lot of what we're doing at Kāinga is very much, improving standards and building better, building as we go. There is still a number of, both from a consumption emission, so what we're building these apartments out of, as well as the operational emissions over time. So there's still, if we look at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment have, their Building for Climate Change program, and their targets for alignment with 1.5 degrees, we've still got a number of steps to go before we get there. But definitely improving. The one thing that I would say as well is what we've got to remember in our built form is the changing natural environment, or the changing climate that we're seeing will mean at the moment we are dealing a lot with homes that aren't heated well enough that heat escapes. We are already, but we are increasingly going to see a lot of issues around overheating, and so making sure that we don't just funnel down one pathway and forget that actually with the shifts in temperature, shifts in humidity, all those kind of things, we're going to have to build to a standard that actually accommodates that as well.
If you were to imagine urban New Zealand in, say, 20 years' time, what would be some of the hallmarks of it that you would hope to see in this time?
What I would love to see is, as we rode here from Te Awa, is we were talking about the monia, the forms, the natural forms that you have around the city, and what would be great to see is accentuating that, is making the most of those natural features in our urban form, where you've got the top of the monia, but you've also recognised that beyond the monia, it's wetlands. It's a lot of wetlands. So how do we make sure that we don't kind of concrete over those wetlands, which are bad from an environmental perspective and also bad from just a building's perspective, because they will flood. And so seeing the built form and the natural form coming together a lot more closely. Like I said earlier, that you're not just plonking a reserve over here and putting a fence around it, but actually it's part of your built form. You see it as part of that structure of your city, and I think that's what we want to try and create, not just here in Tāmaki Makaurau, but across the country, really.